Excellent. And all right, here we go. It looks like we have a good group of people on with us. So thank you for joining us.
All right. Well, good morning. For those of you that I don't know, my name is Lori Leyva, and I work in the Alumni office at Loyola, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you to the first of what we hope is many of these alumni webinars. This very first one, we have worked in coordination with the Office of Mission and Ministry. And today's webinar is going to feature a couple of our alumni. And so I'm very grateful to all of you for joining us. I'm very grateful to our panelists for tuning in today. And I will now turn it over to my colleague, Father Justin Daffron, who will lead us in a prayer as we get started.
Thank you, Laura. And we are so grateful to have the gifts and talents of our alumni today to share their story with President Tetlow. And so as we gather from across the country virtually, let's just pause and remind ourselves that it is our good God that blesses us as a Loyola community and gathers us today. And Jessica, if you don't mind advancing the slide. This is a prayer for discernment that comes from Father Pedro Arupe, former Father General of the Jesuit Order. And so I just invite us to pray together. Grant us, O Lord, to see everything now with new eyes, to discern and test the spirits that help us read the signs of the times, relish the things that are yours, and communicate them to others. Give us the clarity of understanding that you gave Ignatius through Christ our Lord. Amen. Amen. Can advance the slide again, Jessica? Thank you. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. The chat function has been disabled for today's seminar, but we will have the opportunity for question and answer, and that's found on the bottom of your screen, most likely, in the Q&A. So please feel free to send questions throughout the webinar to any of our panelists, and we will handle those at the end of our session. We'll start though with their stories, and they're compelling stories, and we wanted just to have them talk, and then we'll have some discussion. So thank you for advancing. And we'll start in reverse order. Jared, if you don't mind going ahead and going first, and we'll move backwards to President Tetlow. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's an honor and pleasure to be here. It's wonderful to see all of your faces. Related to this specific topic, finding God in all things, as I reflected on that and I definitely thought about sort of my particular journey, really from a business perspective to a certain extent. I mean, I growing up, I grew up in the Catholic Church, grew up with Young Life, and then Awakenings at Loyola, which is a big deal, and I understand it still is, which is wonderful to hear, and even Jesuit, silent spiritual retreats today. But really, as I think about sort of my story, it really is about having conversations with God, really from my teenage years to today. And the progression of those conversations has gotten to the point where God's my business partner. So early in my business career, I was struggling in the profession of sales, and I did not do well for the first several years. I finally started talking to some of the most successful people in the business at how they were successful, and they said, "Oh, well, we pray for success. What do you pray for?" And I said, "Well, I pray for humility." And they just laughed at me and said, "Well, that goes to show for the results you're getting. You're getting what you're asking for." And so you know, I basically started praying for success. And I went from pretty mediocre to the top 5 salesperson at the company at the time, which is pretty cool for me. When I then moved into a new company, a company called Sun Edison in the solar industry over a decade ago, we had a lot of big projects that we were working on, and I prayed to God and I said, you know, if you let us be successful in these projects, I will give you 20% of whatever I get from a bonus or a commission standpoint. And we won all of them eventually. And I was able to then I had to come through. You don't make that promise and not come through. So I came through. And then we made a lot of donations through a donor advised fund that we set up, the Denver Foundation. And then effectively 7 years ago, I started my own company. And I said to God, okay, I'll go 50-50 with you if you'll be my business partner. And whatever comes through for me, after I've taken care of my family obligations, I'm going to give the rest. I'll split everything with you 50-50. And, you know, 7 years in, we're making, you know, this has been an amazing year for us. We've gone really built a company from scratch, built it up slowly but surely. And I'm literally taking the dividends, the returns, the profits, and I'm splitting them in half. And we're now able to use that and really and do something with it, which has created a whole new part of my life, and that is kind of a realization. And the first time I met President Tetlow, we had this exact conversation. I had literally just come from Mass a couple of days before, where the homily was about how we were stewards of God's gifts. And I said to myself, oh my gosh, I am a steward of God's gift, and I'm being given all these gifts. And really, as Loyola graduates, we are all stewards of God's gifts. We're so blessed and lucky to be graduates, right? So from that perspective, I've been, you know, doing a lot of discerning, a lot of praying. My wife and I have been about, well, what do we do with all this? How can we take these gifts and make the biggest impact in the world? And so now it's really praying and spending a lot of time contemplating what does God want me to do with this? How do I go forward with it? And it's an ongoing daily conversation. Sometimes it's daily, sometimes, but whenever we get back in tune with each other, it's an ongoing progressive conversation. And I feel incredibly, you know, humbled and blessed by where I've gotten to be through that process. But you know, it's our job to serve and to help others. And it's just been a wonderful journey and path for me. It's been something that I feel very, very blessed about, and something that, you know, what I have found through this whole process is when you give, you get 10 times back. And the more that you serve, the happier you are. And the more that the more you serve, the closer you are to God. And it all intertwines with each other. And it's this amazing journey, or has been so far. So that's my story in a couple minutes, and I'll reserve time for the rest of the group here.
Thank you so much, Jared, for kicking us off. And now we'll go to Trove, who will share some of her story. Thank you, Trove.
Thank you all for having me. One thing I've learned and has proven itself to be true over and over again is that everything must be taken in context. So in our social media driven society, we're often fed clips and blurbs without seeing the full video, without getting the full picture. So I want to start kind of my story with providing greater context. In order to find God in all things, it's important, or in order for me to share where I find God in all things, it's important that I share what God is to me and who God is to me. So I grew up in a very small Southern Baptist church in Houston, Texas. So it's almost second nature for me to say things like, God is Alpha and Omega. He's the beginning of the end. He's God Almighty. He's bread when I'm hungry, water when I'm thirsty. Now, I hope I'm not the only person who grew up on some of those phrases. But if I am, I hope that you at least get the picture that I'm trying to paint here, which is I could easily speak about what I've been taught about God, but given the context of what we face in our country today, what I face as a Black woman in America, I'm going to share not what I've been taught, but what I know God to be. And for me, it's very simple. I see God as love, God is joy, and ultimately God simply is. And so I am the Chief Executive Officer of a growing public charter school here in New Orleans. Myself and my team of instructional leaders worked nonstop since March 13th to pivot from an in-person learning model to a remote and now virtual school environment. We worked hard and put in every single measure possible to have our students return to our brick and mortar facility. But shortly before our scheduled first day of school, we found out that we would have to move to a completely virtual setting. In order to meet those needs of our students in that virtual setting, we knew we would need to screen all of our students in person, actually, using a few quick but proven diagnostic assessments, especially for our youngest learners. Many people were worried if our pre-K students would actually keep their face mask on, if they would be nervous or afraid of their teacher because of his or her face mask, all valid concerns. But when we began our screening process, in extremely small groups, of course, God showed himself. These little ones had no fear. They were filled with excitement, hopefulness, and pure joy. In a time of extreme change and never-ending uncertainty, I find God in his joy, in the twinkling eye of my students, the slight skip up the steps in their small feet, and the resiliency of their actions and acceptance of change. As I mentioned previously, God simply is. And this is a big one for me. I find God in the sheer fact that I am. Now, some people might say, that's it. You find God just in the fact that you're alive? And my answer is yes. Again, context is important. In early July, I actually tested positive for COVID-19. I had no idea what to expect, but I knew what I heard on TV. I knew what I heard happens to those with this virus. And there's no real way to fully convey how scared I was. It's not an experience I ever want to go through again, nor one I hope anyone else experiences. But during this fight with this virus, every day I was blessed to open my eyes and take a deep breath, no matter how challenging it may have been. It was a reminder of God's goodness and his grace, and how the fact that I am in a time where so many have unfortunately perished is a reminder of who God is. So for those of you who are on this webinar and who know me, you know how passionately I fight to ensure a socially just society for all, but especially for Black and Brown people. Which is why even if I never experienced COVID-19, I can still find God in literally the fact that I am. You all know the names: George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Tamir Rice, Tatiana Jefferson, Botham Jean, the list goes on. Many take life and our inalienable rights for granted. But I, as a Black woman in America, I can't and I don't, which is why every day that I am is proof that God is. And lastly, I find God in Loyola and the love that this university has shown me. I didn't find a lot of people like me at Loyola when I first entered the campus. I'm not Catholic. I never attended private school. I grew up in a single parent household and had very limited financial resources. Yet Loyola welcomed me with open arms, allowed me to thrive, elevated my voice, and embraced my differences. And this has continued far past my years on campus. I find God in the progress our university is making. I mean, who would have ever thought that we would have a non-Jesuit woman leading our school? Like, while I have not yet had the opportunity to meet President Tetlow in person, I do follow her virtually. I see God in her leadership, her love and commitment to each and every student through the marathon of many graduation ceremonies, and her efforts to diversify the staff. In 2016, I penned a letter to the then leadership of our university at the delayed response to the killing of Alton Sterling and what I felt was an abdication of our responsibility as a social justice university. Here we are, 2020, unfortunately facing similar situations, yet no letter from me. Why? Because of the love our Loyola leadership showed. There was no prompting, no hesitation, no dilution of the message. President Tetlow and her team made a statement and took action that affirmed Black Lives Matter, that assured our social justice university was connected and concerned about the community in and outside 6363 St. Charles, and confirmed that there's a place for people like me at Loyola. So thank you, Loyola, for creating this space that I could share where I continue to find God. And thank you, Loyola, for making it easy to find God in you.
Thank you so much for your words, Trove. Lindy?
Okay, hello. Thank you for having me also. I'll start where all good things start, at the very beginning. St. John's Gospel is my most favorite gospel, and especially his prologue. So I'll start there in my beginning. When I was a small child, I stayed with my grandmother quite often, and we would spend large amounts of time outside. And I will never forget, I think I was 5 or 6 years old, and this strong wind came about. At that time, she was living out in West Texas, so the wind there is always blowing. And I remember looking at her and I said, "There's something different about that wind." And she looked at me and said, "Really? Tell me about that wind." And I said, "I can't." And she said, "Well, what do you mean?" And I said, "It's very mysterious. I don't understand that wind." And I remember my grandmother saying, she never said anything more than, "Never lose sight of that wind. Always pay attention to the wind. Let it speak to you." And she never named the wind, but for years I would always refer to it as the mystery. Then as I was growing up, we moved, my mother and I and my stepfather and my brother, we all moved to St. Simon's Island, Georgia. That's on the coast of Georgia, southern Georgia. And we lived there for a very long time, and I went through some great difficulties with my stepfather, but I made it through. And my mom and stepfather divorced, and we were forced to move to, my grandmother at that time had moved to Louisiana. That's where I'm in northeast Louisiana in Monroe, and that's where she was. And we had to move here, and I absolutely could not stand it. I wanted to go back home, so I did. I hopped on a Greyhound bus, and I took me and my $100, and we went. And I got off the bus and I went right back to that sand. I didn't have anything, and I really didn't care because I had the sand. The sand welcomed me. And one night, and I lived on that island for a long time, and I never really paid attention to the night sky. But one night I was lying there, I was all by myself, but I didn't feel alone, and I didn't know why. And I looked up, and there was this beautiful sky with these beautiful stars. And for the first time, I began to see I'm such a small part of a greater whole. There's something magnificent here. And it was that same mystery, but even more so, I know now, and I termed it as wisdom then, but I now know what that wisdom was with a capital W. And she was very beautiful in greeting me that day. And I think I was about 16 or 17 then. Well, no, I was 17. I know I was. And I began to think to myself, I've got to find out what meaning is in what I'm experiencing, the mystery and the wind that stayed with me, because the wind always embraced me and still does today, and the stars, what I saw above me. Well, I began to search and seek, and I did not come from a religious household at all. The word God, Jesus, nothing was ever spoken. So I began to seek. Fast forward, I was 20 years old, and I found myself sitting on a pew in a Catholic church on the Great Easter Vigil. And I was sitting there waiting to go outside to something I'd never experienced. And I walked outside, and I will never forget. I saw the great Easter fire, and I felt the mystery, and I felt the wisdom that I experienced in the wind, and that I experienced on that sand. And then I heard the story, the creation story being read, and things just began to move all around me. And then I felt the water. I'm sorry, but I felt the water being poured across my head. And then the sacred chrism oil, I smelled it. And then to taste the bread and the wine. You know, all of these things came to hit me all at once, and I realized I'm not in a liturgy, I'm in a cosmic liturgy. And so it was so beautiful because it was as if the universe embraced me fully right there. And that's when I knew that the dance that had been going on since I was a small child, I had been dancing with the divine the entire time. So it's very moving to me still today because it's still very real to me today. Every time I walk outside, that hand extends to me and it pulls me into a tree, or it pulls me into the grass, or it says, hi, here I am in the sunrise and the sunset. So God is extremely real to me in the natural world. And I don't ever like to refer to it as simply the natural world, because the snake, the butterfly, the beetle, they're all individuals, just like each one of us. We are all individuals, and God knows each member of his creation, or God's creation, just as God knows each one of us. So it's very moving to me. And as a youth minister, this is what I give back to my students. They give more to me than I could ever give to them. But I try to help instill in them that we are members of the body of Christ, but the body doesn't only take on the form of the human body. The body comes, as St. John said, and the word became flesh. He didn't say human flesh, he said flesh. And that would be the snake, the butterfly, the beetle. Even the bark of a tree is flesh. The cuticle of the plant is flesh. So God can be found in all things, literally. And so, and also St. John said God is love. And I've never experienced love like I do in the embrace of the wind, the stars, the water, the trees, the birds, flowers, and the animals. So it's in all of these that I find God.
Thank you, Lindy, for sharing your story with us. President Tetlow?
There's so much that resonates with me and what everyone just said, of Jared, of seeking the meaning in life and figuring out that success was all about sharing and at a level that few people do, just like the Gospels tell us to, and Trove and seeking justice and pushing and trying to make the world a better place and finding her life's work in that, and Lindy of finding the magic in creation and the joy in that and the love in that. And so similar stories in all those ways. My training to take this job, which is a very daunting task of being the first lay president of a Jesuit university, was less about formal training than the fact that my father actually was a Jesuit priest for almost 20 years and left to have a family. So I got a Jesuit training from birth. And I remember as a little kid how we would go on walks around the neighborhood, and he would find God in all things in such a literal way. He would stop and show me the curl of a fern growing. And we would count the lizards on our walk and all of those things that Lindy talked about. And then in addition to that, how much God wanted us to understand those things, and talking about the geometry inherent in that curl of the fern, and what we can discover about the stars by figuring out the science and the math of it. He just took such pleasure in that. And I was really raised with that. And I get that again with my daughter, who's 8, when we go on walks and count the lizards, because that magic that children can perceive that you often lose as an adult. I think that's a lot of finding God in all things, is you don't lose that, as Lindy hasn't. I find God in the tough moral choices, in both the ones that come with great big labels on them that say tough moral choice, that you agonize over and you try to figure out as best you can. But then even more so, the older I get and the bigger the jobs I've had, in the small choices that don't come labeled as big moral dilemmas, but that collectively are a much bigger set of moral dilemmas, those little choices you make every day that add up to a life's work of integrity or not. And I take a lot of comfort reading about Ignatius, who was this amazing saint with this powerful, sort of conversion story. But he also was a bureaucrat like me. He led an organization that was complicated. He wrote hundreds and hundreds of letters about small bureaucratic details. And to find, as he did, the wisdom in that, to find God in those choices is really important, because that's how we spend most of our time. And doing that is discernment, right? Where you sit and you try to really feel God in making those decisions. And the way that I've always thought about it, and the Jesuits have particular language for, is that when you do good, it makes you feel good. So it's a simplistic way to say it, but the Jesuits talk about the examine, where do you find consolation? Where did you feel good about what you did that day? And it makes you feel good. And just to give it measure, if any of you rolled down your window and given, a $20 bill to a homeless person and just felt unbelievably proud of yourself, and then in a very Catholic way felt guilty about how proud you are of yourself at that moment, because it's really nothing to give away a bit of money to a homeless person. But I do think that God has wired us to feel pleasure in doing good, right? That it makes us so happy is okay. Just go with that. You don't have to be embarrassed by that. And so it's that daily examine of thinking, okay, here's where I felt good. And then the opposite of where I didn't feel so good about myself. And I think, as Trove talked about Loyola and racial justice, there are lots of moments where the students, in pushing as they should, as I did when I was their age, so I can't really complain about it, make me feel uncomfortable. And that there's part of me that wants me, when I feel uncomfortable, to just pull away and not be in that place of feeling uncomfortable, to make excuses for why I should get out of it. And then there's the better part of me that thinks, maybe I'm feeling uncomfortable because I feel guilty, because they're right, because I have things I need to work on, and to embrace that, and to go in a particular way that uncomfort doesn't become shame, right? That's not what God's about, is to make us feel shame. And too often religion has become that shaming method, but that it's, as the examine works, it's about learning the lesson, forgiving yourself, moving forward, trying harder the next day. It's one day at a time, right? It's not about kind of going into a place where you don't know what to do with yourself anymore. It's feeling loved in the way that a parent corrects, but does it in love. And I get that in finding God in all things. I think most of all, and as we're returning to on campus in person, pray hard for us. I get it back, as Trove hopefully will soon too, is I find God in the faces of the Loyola students. I literally feel like, Jesus is running around on campus and coming up to me and saying the nicest things, that these students are spectacular, as you all know, as alums, and the ways that they just blow me away by how kind they are, how thoughtful, how concerned they are about each other, the community that they create. That is just the joy I get every day. And I know that even more intensely because I've been deprived of it since March when we went virtual. And so now to see them again, those mini commencement ceremonies that Trove referenced, where that we had every half hour, we did this marathon of tiny little commencement ceremonies, because the crowd limit became 25 right before we did it. So we had many of them, and with a lot of help. Anyway, that was just such a moment of remembering of how much the work we do is to get to see God in these students. So I will stop talking there, but thank you.
Thank you, President Tetlow. I'd like to remind those that are participating in the webinar that you're welcome to provide questions in the Q&A function of Zoom. And I'll start with our first question that we've received related to COVID-19. And this is not directed to any one panelist, but to anyone who would like to respond. Have you been able to find God in COVID-19?
I can respond. I think not just in battling the virus, but the entire time we always say in these unprecedented times and things aren't normal. And sometimes I think about it as like, maybe this is a good thing. Like I've actually never felt so connected to some people. Like some people I've just kind of been very passive in how I maintained a relationship with them. And had it not been for some of the restrictions or luxuries, I guess, that we used to take for granted, I would have never started to value things the way that I do. So I think in some of the things that we're experiencing with COVID-19, I do see how God has really refocused a lot of what we do, allowed us to appreciate things in a greater context, in a greater sense.
Thank you, Treve. Any other thoughts from other panelists?
It occurred to me.
This is Jared.
Oh, go ahead, Jared.
Go ahead, Tanya.
When we were first really isolated, the finding quiet, the noise of our lives was gone. The fear of missing out was totally gone. I found such relief in that because there was absolutely nothing else going on. Right? And so you could just be present with your family or your friends or whoever you were lucky enough to have with you. The fact that going out for a walk and looking at nature was the most exciting thing available to us. I feel like that there was a lot of presence of God in that. And that, frankly, it's hard sometimes when things are going perfectly and you're sort of floating along in your life to stop and think the big questions. Challenges are this opportunity to do that. And it is another growth gift. And I feel like God, as these storms churn up in the Gulf, that we've had enough of those and we're good with what we have. But no, I think it's been such a profound moment for everyone, for the whole, not only the whole city and community and nation, but the whole planet.
Yeah, it just reminds me of on a retreat, a Jesuit priest actually said to me, and he wanted me to spend a day thinking about this phrase: "Be still and know that I am." And be still and know that I am. And it kind of touches, it just plays into directly what was just said. But the stillness and the quiet is that's where I find God the most on a daily basis. As COVID kind of hit and got going, I also ended up having a major, I wrenched my lower back. Middle age is such a wonderful thing. I literally I had to go to the ER and get a lot of medication to reduce swelling, that sort of thing. But then I started waking up between 3 and 4 in the morning. And I still do right now for the last, since about February. That is absolutely the most profound, prayerful time. I get up quietly many days, and I will sit and read, or I'll pray, or I'll think, and it is amazing. So that has been a very strange but effective method for me in this experience, without any question. The other thing that has hit me at a more global level is I've seen pictures of the Himalayas from India that you never could see because there's so much pollution, so much smog, and it's almost like a reminder. And I'm in the solar energy world. Environmentalism is a passion of mine, and I can it is to see so much natural clarity and beauty, while also dealing with a lot of stress and consternation and concern around COVID-19 for sure. It's been something else that I found very interesting and quite profound.
Thank you, Jared.
And I agree with Jared about the Himalayas. That was the first thing that, when I saw that in the news, where the individuals, the people living in the cities around, they said they could see it for the first time in years, the mountain ranges. And then I think that COVID-19 also has taught us just how interconnected we all are as creations, as beings that God created. Because with the pandemic, of course, it spreads all over. That's what a pandemic is. But to know that animals, such as the tiger who also contracted it, and the other animals that are being found to contract the virus as well, it shows just how interconnected we are. but it also shows, I think COVID-19 also shows us that for those of us who stop and we were, made to stay indoors, but we couldn't stay indoors. We had to go outside. We had to get out. That once we do go sit outside, that we're never alone. We're never at any moment. We may feel lonely, but we're never alone. We can't be alone because our Creator created it, the universe in such a way that we could, it's all about relationship. So, and I think that's what people are starting to learn, that we always want to run and hide, but really we don't. We're made for relationships. So I think that's a very big lesson from COVID-19.
Thank you, Lindy. It's my pleasure to introduce my colleague, Jessica Brosewer, who is going to be helping facilitate some of the questions for those of you who would like to speak. Thanks, Jessica.
Thank you. We do have someone raising their hand, Jane. I'm going to unmute you. You can go ahead and ask your question. Maybe. Oh, here. That might work. Jane, can you hear us? Or if you don't have a microphone, you can go ahead and ask the question in the Q&A, and then we'll get to it next. But we do have a question in the Q&A as well.
The next question relates to the gift of faith. The gift of faith is something that's handed down from person to person. Could you share somebody that has been important in helping you on your own personal faith journey? And what did that person gift you with?
Do you want me to respond to that?
Oh, no, Jane, we were opening up for your question. If you would like to offer that.
All right. Well, it really isn't a question. It's more a statement.
Please.
I'm a professor here at Loyola, and after Katrina, Loyola made a decision to close the education department. And that was very sad for me. But I felt like I had to see God's will somehow in that. And so I had enough years and of age that I retired. And I thought I would do whatever it is people do in retirement. I wasn't quite sure what that was. And that I was retired for 90 days. And then the University of New Orleans called me up and invited me to join their faculty. And I thought I would go for a year, and I was there 6 years. And in the 6th year, Loyola called me up and said, "We think we've made a mistake. Would you come back and restart the education department?" And I thought, this is God calling. I could have said, "I'm very happy here. You put me out. I don't want to come back." I came running back. And I restarted the education department, both undergraduate and a graduate program. And I don't want to take a lot of time. I think the message for me is God directs my life. I don't. I'm very happy to be here with the first woman president of Loyola. And every time I see her, I think I'm meant to be here with you. And I feel the same way. I'm starting a new semester. And whenever I go into a classroom or see people on Zoom, I think I'm here for a reason. And all of you have come to me to teach me something. And I've never, ever gone a year where I did not learn so much from my students. And this August, I will be starting the 50th year of teaching full-time on a college campus. And where God has brought me different places, I truly feel Loyola is home because he keeps bringing me back. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Amen.
The question on the gift of faith, if anyone has a thought about sharing individual or experience that's been helpful for your own development.
So I talked about my dad already. The surprising gift of faith I'm getting right now is my 8-year-old daughter, because the questions she asks about God are so profound, and the things she comes out with, like when she was maybe 5, she said, "Mommy, I love you as much as God loves you." And I just almost bent over. And the challenges she has to it, of the wanting to understand and the struggle, make it all real again in ways that I really appreciate.
I think that holds true.
This is, go ahead,
Jared.
please.
Oh, okay. I think that holds true for me too when it comes to the young people, the young people that I minister to and that I accompany, and that they allow me to accompany them. They have gifted me with faith, because to look in their eyes and to see the world in the way that they see it, they have a wide view where we sometimes have such a narrow view. I always say that there are times I really feel like I'm looking through the peephole and they throw the door open and they see things that I miss. And I'm so thankful for that, because they truly want to make a difference in the world, and they work very hard to do so. And so I think that our young people are so extremely valuable in so many ways. And they are what they keep me going. And so whenever, if you remember the scripture where Jesus was standing and he said, "When the Son of Man returns, will he find faith on earth?" I always think, if my youth have anything to do with it, there's going to be lots of it. So and because they're just gifting it out to others as they go. So I agree with President Tetlow when it comes to the youth and our young people.
Thank you, Lindy. Jared, you wanted to jump in there too?
Yeah, I'll make it brief, but I mean, a couple of things just pop right to mind. Father James Martin, who's a great author, has a book called My Life with the Saints that I finished, I don't know, several months ago. I probably bought 25 books from just reading that one book. And, you know, to me, the saints and the life, the saints themselves are, if you open up to them and you spend time learning about them, it's amazing how you grow and change as a person. And so that's actually something that's been happening to me over the last year or so, is really trying to engage with saints through reading and learning and understanding. And I think that's been just profound. So that book is a great intro book that kind of opens the world from one person's eyes. So that's an amazing one if anyone has time or wants to read it. And then I'll give props to a couple of my former professors at Loyola. God bless his soul, Father Wallow, who I don't know if others had him but man, he had a philosophy of God class which just blew my mind and changed me. Dr. Constance Mui, who I am a huge fan of, and she knows that. Who introduced and opened my mind up to philosophy and just thinking. You know, I too went to public school, very much a middle class kind of upbringing. What probably should never have gotten to Loyola in the first place, but I found a way, and those things just changed my life. So I have to brag on Loyola while I'm on the call. So there you go.
Thank you, Jared.
And we do have a question in the Q&A. Jesse Yandel asks, what do you say to someone who has experienced social injustice firsthand or death of a family member due to COVID-19 when they ask, how could God allow this to happen? Where is the God in that?
So an easy question for us, right? I mean, for me, it's always been about the blessing and the curse of free will, that God is like a parent who's lets their adult children make their own choices and make their own mistakes and suffer the enormous consequences of those mistakes. But the alternative is a world where we don't have moral choices and we don't learn and grow and we don't exist as fully human. And so in that, human beings, you know, I stop and think often that if I could know everything that exists in the world, would I be blown away by all the evil and the selfishness and the wrong or would I be blown away by all the goodness and the generosity and the kindness that happens? And I think all in all, it would be the latter. But that is the hard part, is that it is humans who do this to each other, and God chooses not to intervene because God lets us have freedom and try to learn from it. And then there's a prayer that gets said at Yom Kippur about, if we had to choose between living forever and immortality, but never having room for new birth and new life and first love, would we really choose to ourselves exist forever? Which I've always found very comforting.
I would also like to add to that, and this is something that I've thought about often, like how do you explain certain things to maybe people who have been the victims of various things, or to children, right? Because it's hard to do. And sometimes what I've kind of come to realize is that God is in the choosing. So like there are a lot of people in this world, and God can select anybody to do a lot of things, but he specifically selects certain people to like bring hope, messages of like resilience. And so I think specifically about George Floyd, like how do you explain to his children that like what is going on, that what happened to their father, that there's God in that. But God selected him for a reason. God knew that he was a vessel that could bring about change around the world. And so even with the virus, viruses to come, past viruses, things that don't often have on the outward a clear reason or a good explanation that we can understand. I think that a lot of it is, for me, it is the blessing in knowing that God sees you or values you enough to choose you, and finds the value in what you can accomplish, or what he can accomplish through you.
Thank you. Another question: family, career, civic engagement. All of you are very busy. How do you find time for balance and restorative downtime to fuel yourselves?
You know, that's a good question. When you find the answer, could you send it to me? I'd be glad to know. It's a very hard thing to do. I think that family always is going to take priority. I don't think that, I mean, if we look at the Holy Family, you can see that. So family is always priority. But like, I know when I speak of my family, I just pull them into the mix with me. I don't leave them out. They're all in. As a youth minister, I have youth at my house all the time. We're always in the middle of everything. I'm also still, I'm a student still. I'm working on another degree at Fordham. So that takes a lot of time away from my family. But I try to keep them right in the middle of everything with me so that I don't feel, I never want us to feel disjointed. But it is a very hard thing, I know, for me personally to juggle. But I have a very, very strong support system, not only at home with my family, with my extended family, you know, my mom and my grandmother, but also with my parish family and my friends. I have a very, very strong support system. So I think that really helps to get you through what you're called to do. And I don't think that God ever puts too much on your plate that you can't handle. It just gets kind of shifted around. You know, the peas and the carrots get separated a little bit so that it can make some more room for whatever else. So that's my take on that.
Thank you, Lindy.
I mean, this is Jared. I what I'll say is, when I started my company 7 years ago, a big part of me wanting to start my own company was wanting to do it the right way with balance. And that was, I had worked the better part of 12 years on the road, working 60 plus hours a week on the road, you know, 4 of every 5 days or 3 of every 4 weeks. And and just grinding to make ends meet and to support my family. And so I got to the end of that process, and I was completely fried and drained. And every Christmas, I'd sit down with my wife and say, "Is the juice worth the squeeze? Do we need to keep doing this?" And I would always want her to say no, but she always would say yes. And she knows better than I do. She always does. And so that year, she said, "No, it's not worth it anymore. You don't really know your kids anymore. You don't really know me anymore, and you're getting too stretched." And so I took 3 months off between jobs. We just used money from the savings account. We had just enough. And then through a lot of discernment and prayer, I said, "You know what, I can't go work for another company. I've got to start my own to do it my way." And that turned into creating a much more balanced company and group of people. We're all recovering workaholics. So it's not easy, but you know, we celebrate giving as much opportunity for vacations as possible as it makes sense. We try to carve out time or I do, at least in my day, every single day, to do personal specific things. I am, you know, will probably soon jump back in with a nonprofit again. I've been on different nonprofit boards. And what I find with Civic specifically is we don't have to give that much time, and it ends up being incredibly meaningful to the civic organization. It can be 2 to 3 to 4 hours a month. Somehow, you know, I was on a board for 3 years, and after that, they gave me this award, and I said, "I don't deserve this." And they said, "You guys, you did this amazing job." And I said, "I didn't spend much time with you guys." But they said, "The time you spent was really meaningful and powerful." So that's the best information I can provide if it's helpful.
Thank you, Jared.
I think being a parent makes it harder, but in some ways better, because on the one hand, it adds complexity to the juggling. But on the other hand, I like work. I would work all the time if it were my druthers, but I have an 8-year-old who tells me to drop to the floor and play Lego, and I do that. And so I do think that keeps you from burning out and requires you to shift gears in a different way, and all the joys I get from her, as I talked about, and from my husband. I also think that I love that at Loyola, we start every meeting with a prayer. And I love that it is sometimes the Jesuit in the room, but more often it is a member of the faculty or a person at the meeting. We all take turns, and it is in a very ecumenical way. People bring their own faith to the table. And so we're constantly in the middle of the chaos, stopping to center ourselves. And I find that so valuable and so lovely. And then I think the fact of going to Mass, right? These rituals that make you stop, and whether they work in you know, it's not every Sunday morning that I feel entirely transformed by the homily, but that in the music and the prayer and the just making yourself pause, the sort of meditation of saying a rosary, the ways that we quiet that loud voice in our head and stop and think and feel, those are critical. And so however you work that into your day, it really is important.
Thank you. We have about 5 minutes left, and there's probably time for just one more question. So I'll offer the question that relates to our students. What encouragement would you have for our undergraduate and graduate students for their own faith development?
I would say, for me, never stop seeking, because it may seem like you're not finding what you're looking for, but there may be a reason you haven't found it just yet. Because, I mean, I had to go beyond the moon to find what I was looking for, and it was there. It's always right in front of you. But sometimes I believe that God extends the search for a certain reason, because, you know, it's the universe is a very great big place, and God is within every single aspect of it. And so we just never know where God's going to manifest in front of you. So just don't ever stop searching. And even after you've found, keep searching, keep going, because one minute God may be right in front of you, and then, I hate to say it this way, it seems childish, but God does play peekaboo sometimes to keep you searching. So don't give up, because God will never give up on you. No matter what, God is never going to give up.
Thank you, Lindy. Jared, were you going to jump in next?
If I could go to Loyola again, first of all, if they're students at Loyola, they put themselves in a good position, right? That's the most important thing, is put yourself in a good position so that you can have growth in this area. If I could do it again, I would go to Awakenings every time I had a chance. I would not miss one. I would challenge myself to take more religion and more philosophy classes. I probably will one day go back and do that, just for myself, if I'm so lucky to have that time. You have a campus ministry, you have Jesuit priests, you have people around you that absolutely are on fire with faith. And so tap into it. I felt if there's one thing I felt like I didn't do enough of, was tap into it. It obviously got me, and it's kept me going for a long, long time, but embrace those opportunities, because your college experience is gone in a flash.
Thank you, Jared. Trobe?
Yeah, so I would say I graduated from Loyola in 2006. So my senior year was Hurricane Katrina. And I would say to them, from a person I think like has a little bit of this experience, is that you could not be at a better place at a better time. I know that this does not seem like an ideal situation, but there is no other place that could prepare you academically, socially, spiritually for success in all of those areas than Loyola can. The things that you will learn, the people who will be there to support you and grow you, you can't put a price tag on it, and it'll be out of the experiences that you have now during this time that will really manifest and show you what your purpose and your passion are really about. And the good thing is that you can do all of that at Loyola. So I would say hold tight. Everything is going to work out.
Thank you so much. And President Tetlow, you get to encourage these young people all the time. What's your thought on this one?
Well, I don't know how to top what was just said, but I do feel like whatever their background, students either come from a very religious background, but they're worried because they're 18, they want to be something other than just their parents. So they have to decide for themselves. And for those who increasingly didn't grow up with religion, it's a leap of faith. It's a new thing. But if they choose it as adults, as young adults, then it sticks for life, as you've seen with all of our speakers today, are so moving. And so it's that it is their choice. This is the gift of free will. And that then if they make it part of them, that it is something that will sustain them forever and give them meaning and hope. And most of all, the most important thing is just to feel that profound love of God, which they are, especially at their age, seeking so intensely.
Thank you, President Tetlow. And thank you, panelists. I feel so uplifted having heard your stories. And thank you to those who participated in the webinar today for your questions that have helped to provoke a healthy dialogue. We're just tremendously grateful for the participation. And I'd like to turn it over to Laura for some final concluding remarks.
Thank you. Thank you, Justin. Thank you, panelists. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. I agree with Justin, and I know that I will be continuing on in my day and my afternoon with a new sense of awareness and maybe a little bit more appreciation. And so that's always a good thing. So thank you again for joining us. We said we hope this is the first of many of these webinars. So if you have suggestions for future topics or future panelists, please, the easiest and most efficient way to let us know about those is to email us at alumni, ALUMNI, loino.edu. So send those suggestions our way, and we hope to see you again soon for another webinar. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all.
Thank you.